Today we're talking to Suzanne Hite about anatomy and yoga and the strange yoga cues that teachers use. Sometimes they're metaphoric, sometimes they're inaccurate. So we're going to unpack a lot of those and just have a good conversation about anatomy in our yoga practice. Hope you get something from the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm sitting with a dear friend of mine, Miss Suzanne Hite. Suzanne, you and I have worked in similar studios together. I've taken many of your classes. I think the last class we took together was where was that at? It starts with an A, Athletica.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I taught a class in the studio, and you and your husband came, and,
Yes.
and Christine. Yeah, it was beautiful. So Suzanne is a 500-hour ERYT that's done training under Jason Crandall, which is a beautiful human being. I've not met him personally, but I've heard amazing things about what Jason does and the workshops that he holds. Also, physical therapist assistant and graduating in March.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. All right, good stuff. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
Really,
thank you
really
for having
appreciate
me.
it. So today, Suzanne and I are going to talk about weird shit that yoga teachers say, weird cues that we might cue in different classes, and some of the confusing cues that just kind of pop up. So Suzanne's got a really deep understanding of anatomy. And I love going to you with anatomy questions. Pretty much it's you and Colleen that I'm like, if whoever's in closest proximity, I'm going to ask you all the anatomy questions. So thank you for being here.
Yeah,
Really appreciate
thank you.
it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So before we get deep into our weird and wacky cues, why don't we talk about you for a little bit? How did you kind of find yourself into the yoga world and into this more deeper anatomy style?
Into the yoga world, when I was in college, as they say back in the day, I was actually wandering through a store and there was a VHS tape
Ooh.
that was Rodney Yee
Okay.
yoga.
All right.
And I thought, well, I'll give it a try. I don't have to go on campus. I don't have to go find a gym.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to do these VHS tapes of Rodney Yee all the time. And I practiced off and on for quite a long time just doing that.
Okay.
Fast forward, I moved from Kansas out to here. And lo and behold, I got some injuries doing triathlon training.
Oh, okay.
And my amazing massage therapist / really great friend, Trish Paxton.
Yep.
She said, I just tried this crazy thing. It's called hot yoga. I want you to come. And I said, that sounds hideous.
Right.
So I went.
Trish has a way of doing that.
She has a way of doing that. So I went and I really hated it for about 6 months.
Okay.
But my injuries were getting a lot better.
All right. So you were seeing results even though you're
Yeah.
physically like, this sucks.
Yeah, and it
Okay.
was an outlet for me because I could no longer run or bike or really swim with the injury that I had.
Okay.
And it gave me that physical outlet that I need. And really, running and biking and swimming are just another form of meditation, breath with movement.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
So that is exactly what I needed. As it turns out, then, fast forward even further, I had a child. I moved up to the Bothell area, and I was practicing at Sandy Smith's studio back in the day in Woodinville. And Core Power was coming up to do a remote teacher training.
All right.
So she was so adamant that I should go that she actually spoke to my husband about arranging childcare and what could they do to help me get in to do this teacher training. So I did the teacher training thinking, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that was December 1st when I graduated from that, roughly... it was 2009. I can't do the math right now.
All right. That's interesting. I didn't know Core Power was around in 2009.
So they were not here. They
Okay.
had plans to expand into the Seattle area. And it was a significantly different training than what they do at Core Power because they had 2 people come up from Portland,
Okay.
one of which I'm still actually in touch with. Then they had a lady who was literally coming back from India from a Sanskrit training. She popped in
Oh, wow.
and taught Sanskrit,
Oh,
which my Sanskrit's still horrible.
Oh, yeah, mine's terrible.
And then we had a registered nurse come in and teach anatomy.
Wow.
Then a gentleman who specialized in yoga, history, and philosophy. He actually flew up for a weekend and did a deep dive into history, where yoga comes from.
All right.
So we had this amazing amalgam of people
Yeah.
that we did.
And that was all 200-hour training? Or was
Yeah,
that
that was
Wow.
all in my 200-hour training.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very layered in depth. It seems like it covers the basis of the physical practice plus the spiritual practice and the mental practice of it.
Yes.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was a really great training. And then I started teaching.
Yeah.
That
There
was
you
the
go.
end of that.
Hell yeah. And now you've been teaching for a while, and we used to teach together at a couple studios, and now I think you're at Fusion now, right?
Yeah, I'm just at Fusion at this point for public classes.
Cool, right on, very cool.
Because of school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right on. Yeah, and so talk about your schooling, right? So where did you finally decide to dive deeper into physical therapy?
I'm pretty sure that I had considered it when I went and did my advanced teacher training. It's
Okay.
one of the reasons why I wanted to connect, or I had already connected with Jason Crandall, is because there was so much anatomy and kinesiology, even though he does actually have a degree in Eastern philosophy as well.
Wow.
But, it was this great mesh of information. I started that training and was, thinking about it in the back of my head. And then I started working with a gentleman who's a quadriplegic. And he was almost a year out from his accident. And what I started doing was asking what they were doing in rehab and then figuring out how we could implement similar movements in our yoga practice, whatever that might look like.
Okay.
So it just led me down the path that, maybe my skill set could reach a broader audience, whether that's in the yoga world or just in the physical therapy world, but maybe somehow those can join together in some way.
Yeah. Well, those are those actualization moments when we find the ways that all of our weird shit that we're really passionate about meld together in this strange, unique way. It's like, oh, that's how I'm going to help humanity. That's great.
Yeah.
So wait, okay. So I know we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but yoga with a quadriplegic, that's got to be a very interesting challenge to step towards.
Yeah, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah.
Although I do have to say that he's such a phenomenal human being that it really made it easy on me, for sure. Great heart, great spirit, positive attitude, get up and go. Nothing's going to hold us back.
Yep.
Keep going.
Yep.
But I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was probably terrified for the first 2 to 3 months that I was working with him, that, I didn't want to injure him. I didn't really know enough.
Right.
What the heck are we doing?
Because, with a quadriplegic, you could be doing, if I'm not mistaken, you could be doing something to their body. They don't even realize if it's hurting them or not.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. So one of my favorite things was I contacted one of my great friends and mentors, Troy Lucero, in the city.
Okay.
And I said, I have this gentleman and he wants me to teach him yoga and he's a quadriplegic and I don't know what to do. And he said, you just need to calm down and teach him some breath to movement and you'll be just fine with whatever you come up with.
There you go.
So that's what I decided to do.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So what is breath with movement for a quadriplegic? Like what can they move to identify with the breath?
So he is an incomplete quadriplegic.
Okay.
So there's complete versus incomplete.
All right.
So incomplete means that he might still have some sensory and motor sensation beyond the lesion in his spine.
Okay.
Whereas complete means that's it.
You're done.
Nothing below.
Gotcha.
Right? So when we think of like Christopher Reeve, nothing below.
Gotcha.
So he can he has some control of his arms,
All right.
some feeling around his chest. He can actually move his toes and move his legs.
All right.
So it started with, let's do sun salutations in the chair. And then I realized that he's in that ridiculous chair all the time.
All right.
Nobody wants to still sit in their chair. That'd be like going to an office worker and saying, let's only do chair yoga with you today. Right? I mean, that doesn't change what they need to have changed.
Right.
So then it became, okay, let's stand you up. So we get him to stand and he can balance on his own. And he was working on trying to step and walk, which he actually can take some steps now on his own, quite a bit.
Hell yeah.
But so it was, okay, how can we help him? How can we do yoga with lifting a foot off the floor?
Okay.
Right? Inhale and exhale. Maybe it's inhale, hold the foot, not the breath,
Right.
and then set it back down. Right? Then floor poses for sure. We do a lot of back bending.
Okay.
Right? So airplane pose
Very cool.
on the floor, like salabhasana, locust pose. Variations of that. Sometimes a cobra pose if his arms are agreeable that day.
All right.
A lot of back bending over bolsters.
Okay. All right.
So if you're in a chair all day, how tight your quads are, your hip flexors,
Right.
how sore your tailbone might get. Even if you can't feel it, you know it's sore.
Right.
And that's what I've learned.
Yeah.
So reducing all of that and changing it and then adding breath with it is fantastic.
Yeah. There's a gentleman I've been working with. We just talked about this before we went live, but he's 2 years recovering from a stroke. And you know, the way that you speak about this person you're working with, I feel very similar to the gentleman I'm working with. It's so inspiring. It's so inspiring to see somebody make the best of the situation in front of them, but not just to make it the best. They're literally good with where they're at. They're appreciative of the journey. That it's so inspiring. But I do have a question for you because your anatomy background. One of the things that I've in my research, so very similar to your quadriplegic friend, as soon as I met this gentleman, I called Tang, right? Tang's my guy. I was like, Tang, okay, here's my deal. Guy had a stroke. I'm working with him with yoga. What can I do to help? He's like, breath with movement, keep the head above the heart, you know, because strokes, you know, you have the blood pressure issues, and some other ideas. And I'm like, beautiful, right? Gave me that jumping off point. But the question I want to have for you, if you know it, if not, no big deal. But so I know that the head above the heart is good for anybody with blood pressure issues or has just come down from a stroke. That's what I've read. That's what I've been told. I am just going off of basic knowledge from that. Since we've been working together for a little while now, I want to introduce things like you just said, bolster underneath the lower back to lift the hips up and give a gentle back bend because his stability isn't that strong. So going into a back bend, standing back bend, I'm there supporting him. Like I'm there just in case he falls and all that stuff. But I'd like to have him have that support himself. So do you think that's just a gentle heart lifting above the head, right? Do you think that would mess with the blood pressure too much in a situation like that, or
It as you'll find if you talk to anyone and that's working or heading towards the physical therapy world, it depends. That's what we always say. It depends. It does really depend on where the lesion was in his brain and what his recovery has looked like at this point, whether or not he has challenges with his blood pressure, and then what led to the stroke as well. I would say it's a great conversation. I would write out all the information you want to do with him and have him forward it to his physician.
Great. Okay.
And then get clearance that way.
Perfect.
Because more than likely, he sees a physician on a regular basis
He does,
for follow-up and to make sure that he's progressing properly and that he doesn't suffer another one.
Right.
So I would check with his doctor. More than likely, if you want to do something where you have his chest over a bolster, you can still put a block underneath his head so his head does not hang below his heart backwards.
Gotcha.
I would prop his head up just so he's in neutral, because neutral is a hard place for most of us to get to anyhow.
It definitely is. That's going to be one of the cues we talk about later too. Right
so
on.
that's probably what I would recommend until you get information back from his physician.
Beautiful. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
And see, that's why we have homies. You know, we go to our friends and we ask our friends what we don't know. I could Google that, right, and then just get some like non-conversational information, but having the person in front of you, you can be like, but what about this? And then they give you an answer. Well, what about that? And they give you an answer. It's like, okay, cool. I just learned something. Thank you.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
that.
Sure.
Good stuff. Okay, so working with amazing people, working with quadriplegics, helping them find their bodies and their breath again, which is so inspiring. And then, so you're in physical therapy school and towards the back end of your program, right?
Yes. Yep.
Very cool.
1 more quarter to go.
Hell yeah. Love that. What do you plan on doing after you're done with your schooling? What do you plan on doing with the education you're getting?
I hope to find a job.
As a physical therapist assistant?
As a physical therapist assistant. My next rotation is actually inpatient at a hospital, which I have not done yet. Everything I've done is what most people think of as physical therapy, where I'm in an outpatient clinic. People are ambulatory, right? They have no issues getting there. They have somebody bring them in. We do therapy and then they go home.
Okay.
So now I'll be in the hospital, which will be joint replacements, post-stroke, traumatic brain injuries, could be spinal cord injuries or spinal fusions. There's a long list of reasons why you might need physical therapy in the hospital.
Right.
Post-cardiac surgery, for example, like how do you get in and out of your own bed, right?
Wow.
So how do you vacuum your home?
Yeah, so you're teaching people how to just relearn their bodies more or less. Wow. That's a big heart. It's a big heart. There's probably a lot of frustration that goes on the side of the person having to relearn a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, so much of it is helping them manage their own expectations. That's always, and I think that's true even in the yoga studio.
Yeah.
Is helping people understand their own bodies, whether that's a limitation or maybe it's not enough limitation.
Yeah. Yep. Hyperextension, hypermobility. That statement really resonates with me a lot, especially in this time that we're in now, because we had yoga studios closed down for months and months and months. Some people had online practices and were able to find different modalities. But once those studios opened back up, people expected their practice to be right where they left it, right? And if you stepped away from your practice for 2 weeks, you can realize how much that practice not goes away, but it takes a little bit to get back. But if you step away from that practice for months and months and months, it's going to be a little bit of a road. And again, it's not to say you can't get there, because you definitely can. You've proven that your body can do it. But to have that expectation is going to create a lot of resentment when you don't reach that expectation right away. So having that patience with your body, that patience with your practice to get back to a place that you might, call normal, but that new place you find might be something that's way cooler than the place that you left, right? And that goes for finding our newer bodies when we have injuries. A lot of the women that after they've had babies, right? The body doesn't act the way it used to, especially for a long time. If you have a C-section, if you've had that, just sticking with pregnancies, you have relaxin, the hormone that releases and makes all your joints loose, right? And if you're practicing a heavy yoga practice with loose joints, then you're probably gonna have an injury if you're not paying attention to what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of variables to look at when we're approaching these bodies.
Yes. There always is.
Yes. There's never one way. And that's a great way to start our little session here. So so Suzanne and I were going back and forth about topics to talk about, and weird yoga cues, anatomy yoga cues kind of just popped up, and there's a lot of strange things that we say as yoga teachers. There's a lot of us that use very metaphoric language, which is beautiful, but can be confusing as well. If you're expecting to say, put your knee on top of your ankle, but you hear some kind of weird butterfly metaphor going into it, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to think now. And then there's also, there's newer teachers, and I can speak to this as myself. When I was still learning how to cue, how to hold space for a class, how to work the heat, how to make sure my music was right, doing all the plates, keeping all the plates spinning, it's a little, it took a little while for me to get the verbiage right that I wanted to use for the way that I want to cue poses. So then you have the inaccuracy of some teachers that have the best intentions and they're doing the best they can, but they're still fumbling through and trying to figure out the way they want to speak about things. So there's a lot of layers that go on in a yoga studio that maybe we realize, maybe we don't realize. And a lot of these cues and a lot of these like quote unquote expectations, like they're not expectations that anybody has on them except for maybe you and yourself, which shouldn't be there also, right? So we want to go through a couple of these. We
Okay.
actually have a list of all these. Yeah,
Great.
We're gonna see where we go from here. So starting off, knees together in a standing twist.
Oh boy, you're going right for it.
Right into it.
Just right into it. So when we talk, I'm already uncomfortable.
I need an adult.
When we talk about a standing twist, are we talking about chair pose, Utkatasana, lightning bolt pose, and then twisting?
Okay, we can go there. Yeah, definitely. Let's do that.
Okay, we'll start with that.
Yep.
So, knees together. If you have your knees together, what happens is then you fix the pelvis
Okay.
in one position. Because if your knees start to shift, then your pelvis will shift with you.
Because your pelvis is kind of, in the back of your pelvis is kind of like a paddle, right? So it gives it a little bit of mobility, front and back side a little bit.
Yeah, of course, because that's how we walk.
Right.
Right? The two hemispheres of the pelvis come together right at the sacrum. So that's that triangle bone that we feel in the back of our pelvis.
Right.
So if we fix our legs, then we fix our pelvis. If you fix your pelvis and then you create a leveraged twist. So not just one where if I'm in chair pose or Utkatasana and I, let's say, reach my arms out like a capital T and just turn. I stay upright.
Right.
That's an unleveraged twist.
Okay.
So a leveraged twist might be an elbow to a thigh. You might even put your forearm there.
So an anchor point.
Anchor point. And put your hand to hold your thigh for a twist. When you use something as an anchor point, there's more possibility of shearing.
Okay.
And there are certain places in the spine that are more prone to mobility in a way that is considered more unsafe.
Okay.
So your low back, for example, the entire section of your low back only has 5 degrees of mobility for rotation.
Okay.
If you are not allowing your pelvis to absorb some of that rotation in a deep leverage twist, it may translate into the low back. That could be all the different joints, the facet joints in the low back.
Okay.
It could also be especially where your low back meets your fixed sacrum.
Okay.
Because these juncture points at different parts in the spine are a little bit more precarious and prone to shifts and movements.
Okay.
It could also be where your thoracic spine, that's where all your ribs attach, meets your lumbar spine. That is also a very prone hypermobile area because you're changing the place in the spine. So the segments are actually designed differently. Your vertebrae are designed differently.
All right. All right.
So the thoracic spine is designed to rotate.
More mobility.
Side to side. Whereas your lumbar spine, your low back, is designed to back bend and forward fold.
Okay.
That's why only 5% of rotation for the whole section of it.
Okay.
So shearing can happen.
Yeah.
And my super broad definition of an injury is moving one thing too far in relationship to another thing, which is usually the fixed thing.
Okay.
So it's okay if the knees shift to accompany the pelvis, to let the lumbar spine twist a little, and the majority of rotation then happens in your rib cage, your upper spine.
All right. So if the knees, which we hear a lot in yoga when we get into the twist, knees are in alignment, let's say we're twisting to the right, push your left knee and hip forward.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we hear a lot.
Yeah.
So if that left knee starts to track back a little bit in that leverage twist, it's okay.
It's okay, but if you're twisting to the right,
Yes.
your left knee would actually come forward.
Forward. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you start to pull it back because you want two knees into alignment, that's where you're starting to work against just the basic physics of what you're doing.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, if you have any fusion in your lower back, fused vertebrae, anything like that, does that add to the potentiality for injury if you over leverage?
Yeah, of course, because now you have fixed segments around which you are pushing, we'll say, because you are very strong. The more that you use leverage, the stronger you are, right?
Right, yeah.
That's why most people prefer to hook an elbow or to put a hand down, is because we know we rotate more.
Right.
And it feels better for the most part,
Does for
right?
the most part, yeah.
Because we're sensation seekers.
Yeah. Really? Is that why we do that hot yoga, those endorphins?
So, absolutely, if there's been a fusion anywhere in there, one of the biggest challenges with anyone that's had a fusion of any kind is to make sure the segment above or below doesn't become hypermobile to absorb the inability of those fused segments to move.
Gotcha.
And so that's whether it's in yoga or just regular life. It's always a concern and something that physicians will watch out for.
Right. Okay, right on. Well, let's stick with spine. Neutral spine. Right?
Neutral
Finding
spine.
a neutral spine. Like I hear that a lot in class, and that's one of the ones that people were like, I don't really understand what that means. And for a lot of times, like if somebody comes to us after class and says, "Hey, what's going on with this?" That's a good opportunity to say, "Okay, this is what we mean by this. This is me unpacking this." But in a yoga class, like if it's a dialogue-driven yoga class, like a hatha or a Bikram practice, like you're on point. You've got stuff to say, and you got to move on to the next thing. There's only so much you can do. And then same with like a sweaty vinyasa class. There's, I would say yin is probably the most freedom of class that you can to like really set up a pose and use all the vocabulary that you have to get it there. Vinyasa, it's like, okay, knee over ankle, push your back foot forward. Okay, warrior two. Let's go to that one now. And then we have a couple cues for that, and then we go to the next thing, right? But neutral spine is one of those that we kind of do here a lot, especially coming out of child's pose, right? Beginning of class, come up to child's pose. Okay, neutral spine, hands and knees, maybe a little shifting side to side. So what is a good way to just explain neutral spine to a yoga student?
So the spine has very specific curves.
Okay.
Okay. If you notice the curve in your neck should mimic the curve in your low back, which is a lordotic curve.
Okay.
Okay. In between, you have the rib cage, which is a kyphotic curve, and actually in your sacrum is a kyphotic curve as well. But those segments are naturally fused together, so we don't concern ourselves as much with that.
Okay.
So a neutral spine is keeping all three of the curves, neck, rib cage area, and low back, in what would be considered their natural settling place.
Okay.
I believe when most people say find a neutral spine in like all fours, what they mean is have a low back curve, but not one that sometimes I'll give you some of my cues. Sometimes it's not a duck butt.
Duck
like,
butt.
people usually know what that means. A duck butt.
They do. Yep.
So not creating an extra curve in the low back.
Okay.
And I will say that finding a neutral spine for most of us in Western culture is really hard because we are rounded through the rib cage area. So we're hyperkyphotic through the rib cage because we round forward to look at our handheld devices, to drive our cars, to do pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So it takes a lot of work to lift your chest up so it may dump into your low back.
Okay.
So as you start to lift your chest up, you have to engage low belly. So we often forget that a neutral spine has to be supported by the entire circumference of the core.
Transverse abdominis kind of idea.
Transverse abdominis, internal, external obliques, the quadratus lumborum in the back, which is this cute little patch of a muscle in the back, but it's the deepest core muscle.
Okay.
So, but you need all of this to function together, not just finding neutral, letting your hips sink towards the floor so that your tush is up in the air.
Right.
And then your chest is super elevated. It's that combination of engaging all the way through the core, chest up, front ribs in, low belly engaged, and that sensation of putting on a belt that's just a little too snug
Okay.
all the way around your waistline, which will engage that transverse abdominis, which is the deepest layer of your core. And I hate to break the news to all your listeners, but the core is actually designed to like facilitate and stabilize the spine and hold your guts in,
Okay.
as opposed to look really great on a beach.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with looking great on a beach.
Yep. I had.
But we want it to facilitate and stabilize our spine.
Yeah. I have a friend that used to call them go muscles and show muscles when they talked about your core, and said the go muscles are your transverse abdominis, the ones that keep you safe and keep everything knitted in, and your show muscles are like the six pack kind of thing, right?
Sure.
It's like I'll take the go muscles. I'm fine with that. Keep everything nice and safe.
Yep.
So the duck butt, that's I hate to say that it's a generational thing, but it seems like it's a more of a younger commonality, I should say, because there's so I have two young daughters, 17 and 12, 13 almost, and their friends and stuff like that. They like take selfies and all that fun stuff, right? But duck butt is a thing that a lot of kids like to pronounce to change the way that they look in the pictures and blah blah blahs. So now I'm seeing a lot of kids, and I use the word kids because some of them are between under the age of 25, and I hate to say that they're kids. I apologize for that. But it's a commonality where you see kids purposely, let's say young people, purposely pushing their butt out to have that duck butt effect, right? Because it's quote unquote looks good. It's like the duck lips, and nice stuff like that, right? And so, with these younger yogis that are coming in, that's like a common thing. Like as soon as they go into back bends, the duck butt kicks out, then the back bend happens. I'm like, what are you doing? Like you're just trashing your lower back here. And so my cue to them is Michael Jackson. Right? Michael Jackson, tuck your hips forward. Literally put your hand on the front of your pelvis and the back of your pelvis. Tuck that bad boy forward like you're doing the Michael Jackson. Hee hee. And then go from there, right? Quick kicking your butt all the way out.
Yeah, that's it depends.
Okay. Yeah, right.
It depends. There is often for a lot of bodies, especially bodies that are attracted to yoga, a lot more mobility in the low back.
Okay.
And so that's where a lot of that comes from. And I think there's a social media thing about sticking your tush out, and maybe that's still going on because, okay.
Yeah, I think it is.
So emphasizing your derriere, if you will, right? But definitely for people that have a lot of mobility in their low back, they more than likely don't even know that they're doing it. Can also be the same with people that are used to wearing high heels all the time.
Okay.
You cannot wear high heels and not stick your tush out.
I wouldn't know.
Because you've changed the leverage all the way from your feet. Your heels are elevated, right?
So naturally.
All the way up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All the way up to your pelvis. And it's got to stop somewhere. So it usually stops somewhere around the pelvis and low back.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. Because there's that slightly tipping forward when you're wearing high heels because your hips are pulled back, so your body counterweights by pushing forward a little bit.
Yeah, you have to change your center of gravity when you're wearing high heels, and the way that you do that is by rearranging the shape of the pelvis.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So you'd have to anteriorly tilt, so the front of the hips come a little bit forward.
Okay.
The back of the hips go up.
Yeah.
So, are you trashing your low back? Depends, really, truly. Because especially as young folks where they have more mobility just naturally, they could probably do that all day long. There are people that do those hollow back bends all the time and have never injured themselves.
Right, yeah.
And then I also know almost as equal number of people, men and women, who have done the hollow back, and it's really SI joint, low back issues that they've created them for themselves that are long lasting. Like they'll work with that for the rest of their lives.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am very boring and pragmatic when it comes to these type of situations. I might have a conversation about using the lowest part of abdominals just mostly because you never know if that extra low back curve is due to some weakness in the lower abdominals and psoas region, or if it's just a really comfortable shape.
Okay.
So a little bit of both. A little bit of both can go a long way.
Right.
But I would say folks that are really exaggerating it and they're muscling their way to get there,
Right.
that's where it's just, now you're doing something in an extreme, right? You're using your strength to move bones where maybe they don't want to go,
Right.
right?
Okay.
But I mean, we've all seen the Cirque du Soleil performers who can do a back bend and put their fanny on their heads.
Yes, most definitely. I had a
And
woman
then-
in my wheel class that used to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I would just stop class and be like, I can't do anything right now. I'm just mesmerized by the mobility of this woman's spine. Like, good
Right.
God.
Right. And then there are those of us that, you say we're going to do camel pose and we think, okay, well, I'm just going to put my hands on my hips and look at the ceiling.
Still a version. Still a version of camel.
That's exactly right. So I think part of it's going to be the intention of the practitioner. But I also believe in the yoga world that my responsibility is to simply draw awareness to whether or not they might have some muscular imbalances. So I might still cue if we're in Utkatasana or something else where the hips are sticking way out. I might even cue it away from where that is. I might say squeeze your inner thighs together.
Okay.
Because as you squeeze your inner thighs together, that's the gateway to the lower abdominals, lower core muscles. And so naturally you're going to have a little bit of tilt in the pelvis there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If someone really looks like they're going for it, that's the way it is.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, a lot of times where we're in a class and it's I can't give the what I would want to have a correction in the class in the real time, and it's more of a conversation afterwards. Like, hey, how does your back feel? When
Right.
you were doing this, did that feel okay? Like, what's going on with that? Maybe try this. Yeah.
Sometimes they say it feels fine. You're like, great,
Totally. Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, you are hypermobile. You got some stuff. Good for you.
fantastic.
Hell yeah. Go out there and make me proud.
Fantastic. Yeah. It's one of those things that I think our language can always be better. I spend a lot of time actually working on my language
Okay.
and thinking about my cues and deciding how I want to go about things. But I've also learned that sometimes my cues are only based on the experience in my own body and what I consider the average person,
Yeah.
but there are no average people.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so I've had to tackle and take a look at my own ego with those things,
Yeah.
which is always fun.
It is. But, good for you for actually doing that, because a lot of times we just rest on the laurels of, okay, we're doing this. We've been doing this for a long time. We're used to this cueing and this dialogue, whatever it is. But like you said, like things change, like the way that we want to present the knowledge changes. Hell, some of the anatomy that we used to consider being this was the thing is now like, hey, you don't do that anymore. Like,
Right.
Lock out your leg. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Okay.
But because I know that there's safe ways to lock out joints and there's unsafe ways to lock out joints. A lot of the times, we'll just go on to the locked out legs, right? A lot of times, like in the Bikram dialogue, that's where I first heard it, was, and I literally heard this, was lock out your legs, slam the back of your knee towards the back of your mat, and I'm like, and I was new into yoga at the time, and I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. Because what I equated it to was I have friends in the military. And the friends in the military, they tell me when you stand in attention, you do not lock your legs out because you'll pass out. You got about like a couple minutes and then your arteries shut down because you're restricting blood flow and then you start to block out and you're done, right? So, there's that cue that I still hear quite a bit. But I know there's safe ways to lock out joints, right? So what's your opinion on, just that blanket dialogue of like, lock it out, lock it out, lock it out, lock it out, change,
Well, I think it's like a lot of cues in yoga where we have to simplify it down distill it down into something, because it's hot, people are tired, they're thirsty. They may or may not want to be there by the time they get to any pose, right? And short and sweet to the point usually gets it across.
Right.
However, I also believe that these cues that we've come up with that are short and sweet and to the point started with a concept, and then they've been distilled down into something that just might not be appropriate or effective or anatomically correct. So I believe lock the knees or lock your knees is one of them.
Yeah.
Because you want people to engage their quadriceps, right? Their upper thighs, lift their kneecaps up so that you're physically using your muscles to defy gravity and lifting your thigh bones just a little bit off of your shin bones, right?
Okay.
Your tibial plateau.
Okay.
And when you use your muscles in that way, you're not, we'll call it resting in the joint, right? Just relaxing, or resting into your ligaments, your soft tissues.
Right.
However, if you're teaching a pose, it can be a lot to explain to people if you have 20 seconds, 30 seconds to say, please lift your quadriceps, lift your kneecaps, and lift your femurs off of your tibial plateau, which I would never say in a class anyhow. But you might say, feel as if your leg bones are lifting from the floor.
Right.
Although that is actually what I say. I don't often say lock your knee. I say engage your quadriceps, your front of your thighs, and lift your kneecaps up towards the ceiling.
Love that.
Because lock your knees means all different things to different people, and I have no idea generationally if that's even translated.
Right. That's a good point.
I don't know if people know what lock your knees means.
Right. You say lock your knees, they take out their car keys and they're like, I don't know what to do with these.
Is that an app? Is
Yeah,
that
right.
an app?
Is that an app?
Can
You
I
do that
use
from my phone, right?
Can I use Face ID for that?
That's probably a real conversation happening somewhere. I guarantee it.
But I don't even know what that means. And I think so for most people, what they do when they hear lock your knees, they just push their knees back,
Yes.
which doesn't engage the muscles, which is what that concept is supposed to do, is help lift and engage the muscles so that you're using the supporting structure around your joint.
Yeah. Which is a mouthful in a yoga class.
It is a mouthful. I often don't explain why I say it. I just say lift your kneecaps to the ceiling.
Okay.
And I keep it with that.
Great.
But I can't say that I would say that 3 times in a row either.
Lift your kneecaps. Lift your kneecaps. Lift your kneecaps. Change. Yes. Oh man. So sticking with that, there's another one that I hear a lot that I've a lot of the yoga studio owners have kind of shied away from this dialogue, but it's from a forward fold, standing forward fold, whether feet together or not, but it roll up one vertebrae at a time. And that's one that I know is very, very common, especially in the Hatha dialogue in the beginning. But that so the owner of B1, the former owner of B1, had she put very few mandates on teachers. Very, very few. Like you had carte blanche to teach the class, keep people safe. As long as you were doing it, you're doing it right. But she had a couple do not do's. And one of them was do not roll up one vertebrae at a time. Do not teach that in my classes. She didn't feel it was safe, which I agree. It's kind of like lock out your knee. There's safe ways to roll up one vertebrae at a time.
Yeah.
But the way that it was just distilled down, like you said, it probably had some beautiful dialogue as to rolling up and engage this and rock to the heels and blah, blah, blah. But now it's just unsupported forward fold, roll up one vertebrae at a time, see how your back feels. And for some people, that's no problem. For other people, that could be a big injury. So what's your take on that one?
I don't see anything wrong with either.
Okay.
So much of it depends on the architecture of your spine to begin with.
All right.
And really the engagement of that transverse abdominis, that deepest wall of your core that stabilizes your spine. And then actually the one few times we might talk about the rectus abdominis, right?
Yes.
The front of the spine, your front abdominals, and how they engage to help support you as you come up. Do I think it's okay to willy-nilly just roll up? I don't know. I think I pretty much do that all the time.
Okay.
In terms of regular life.
Right. Okay.
Right? So if I bend down to tie my shoe, I don't stop, pull my chest forward, and then lift all the way up and go, whew, glad I'm done tying my shoes.
Dodged a bullet on that one.
Woo!
All right. That's fair. I got you.
Right? But on the other hand, if you're in a hot room and we don't know everyone's anatomical structure, oftentimes the safest way to take a group back up to standing is to teach them to hinge at their hips and to come all the way up.
Like a halfway lift kind of idea and then pulling up from there.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. And so you can have people squat down and find their spine in neutral.
Right, yeah. Draw it back.
Right? So they have a low back curve and their head feels like they have a neck curve. And then come all the way up. Because hinging at the spine hinging at the hips, is an important thing to learn. Especially for lifting mechanics outside of the yoga studio.
Right, yeah.
So many times we see people, they say, I was getting my groceries out of the back of my car and they say I have a bulging disc or a herniated disc now. They already had the perfect storm before they lifted up, their grocery sack of tofu, right? They already had the perfect storm. So had they hinged at the hips or rounded forward to get it? We don't know.
Right.
We don't know. Rounding forward in itself isn't so bad. It's adding leverage. So most injuries occur in the low back from having leverage, so lifting something, and with a twist.
Right. Yeah.
Because of the way the spine is made, those bumps we feel on the back of our spine, the spinous processes, keep our discs from bulging straight back.
Okay.
They go to the side, right? They're slightly right or slightly left. So coming straight up, it's probably okay.
Probably all right.
Probably okay. I always think it's nice to give people a reason that it's not just standing up in regular life. If you want to make it therapeutic in the fact that you're building strength and gaining knowledge of how to use your body. So while you're forward folding, bend your knees, engage through the entire trunk of your body.
Right.
Keep the lowest abdominals pulled in as you come all the way up. Sure. Because people are going to go home and stand up that way anyhow.
Right.
So now maybe you've taught them another way to do it at home.
There you go. Dropping those little nuggets on them. Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, in a group class, standing all the way up,
Okay.
hinging at the hips.
Yeah.
So I can't say that I'm picky about either one. I typically just teach hinging at the hips.
Okay. Very cool. Another one on that same kind of like idea of tying your shoe, right? That's a great example of that. Is the let's take a lunging pose, like crescent lunge.
Okay.
Right leg forward, left leg back, so you got the right knee stacked on top of the ankle. How important is it to have that knee stacked right on top of the ankle? Can it come behind a little bit? Can it go in front a little bit? Does it have to be straight on? I know side to side is a little more precarious, but front and back, to your point, to your example you made earlier, I've heard people made the example to me like, well, I walk up and down stairs all day long. My patella is in front of my knee or in front of my ankle a lot, and it's load bearing. So why is it so important in yoga and not important in everyday life? So I think that's a good point. Right?
I often think that the reason that we say knee over ankle might be for aesthetics.
Okay.
Or it could be another one of those that was distilled down from seeing people that have had knee injuries. They're returning to yoga or they're still practicing their yoga. And that was the position that alleviated their pain.
Okay.
Or discomfort.
Okay.
Or kept their doctor told them that that would be the safest while they're recuperating. Or if you have a knee replacement, there's other reasons for that as well. But I don't see any reason because we do walk up and down stairs,
Right.
which is 100% load bearing because there are many times every step you're balancing on just one leg.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Right? When you're working through your gait, when you're in what's called mid stance, you're standing on one foot.
Yeah.
And we're also in yoga not loading. So if we were in a gym and you were to put like 100-pound bar on me, I can't do that. So, so it would be a bad idea for me to let my knee come forward because my knee's going to take the brunt of the fact that that weight's too heavy for what I'm doing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So having the knee in alignment with the ankle is more important than whether or not the knee is to the left or right. I'm sorry, the left or right would be where the injury could come in.
Yeah.
Whereas the knee just tracking in the vertical angle of that ankle would be.
Yeah. The knee tracking in the direction of second and third toe.
Yeah. Okay.
Is really where you want. And if your knee isn't as bent, right, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, for a lot of people, that makes them use their hamstrings a little bit more or their quads a little bit more, depending upon their anatomy and what angle they take. It's fine.
Yeah. Because, I've seen some people with hypermobility that are in, let's say, Warrior 2, and their hips are below their knee. Now, like, you're just dumping into your hips right now. Like, there's no quad engagement. There's no hamstring engagement. Like, you're just literally sitting in your tissues. That's not, like, let's lift up. Let's engage a little bit. Like, let's get the core engaged a little bit.
I feel more adamantly about that in a crescent lunge than I do about the position of the knee.
Okay.
Being forward or back of the ankle.
More so where the hips are at?
Where the hips are at, because a lot of folks who love to do yoga have this great mobility of being able to drop down. Like they might have this natural ability to be able to do the splits or close to the splits. Right. And when we let our hips just sink into our ligaments, we're just not using our muscles. We're not engaging. So does it feel good? Sure. And sometimes that's why you come to class, is because you want something to feel good.
Definitely.
Fantastic.
Yep. Nothing wrong with that.
But oftentimes when I'm teaching classes, I'm also targeting different parts of the body, different muscle structures. And when I'm especially working with deep core and legs, I'll tell people to squeeze their legs together and to hover just above where their lowest point is so that they're using all of their muscles to engage, to support their bodies.
Love that. Very cool. What about knitting ribs in towards your spine? That was one of the ones that was I got that from a couple people that asked questions about, what are confusing cues for you? And they're like, what does knitting your ribs in towards your spine mean?
Right? Do you really want your ribs to knit together? Because it seems like they shouldn't.
Yeah, it seems like they're mobile for a reason. They need to breathe.
That is really a tough cue to work what you're trying to get to have happen in the body. That's a tough one to work with.
Yeah.
So for people that don't know what that means, if you put your hands on your ribs right where they come up to your sternum.
They V up right there. Yep.
And you kind of push your ribs into your hands. Then as you would now draw them back and use your muscles to draw them back away from your hand, that is said knitting.
Said knitting, yes.
That is the knitting. And so it's using that upper part of core to draw the front ribs back into what we'll call neutral, like just how you're probably sitting or standing right now.
Okay.
Okay? Lots of times when we lift an arm up, when there could potentially be some shoulder mobility, whether it's from the back muscles or the shoulder muscles, the front ribs will flare or lift up.
Okay.
And the idea is if you want to work the shoulders, these ribs need to come back to where they started.
Okay.
Instead of lifting up and visually and sometimes aesthetically, visually and feels good, taking the brunt of all that shoulder work for you.
Okay.
So knitting your ribs in is, if you put your hands back in that spot, pulling the rib cage together, by just contracting the muscles towards your midline.
Okay.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
I've heard some interesting ones with this one. One of my favorite ones, which I love this teacher, she's fantastic, but it just cracks me up. She has people put their hands on their rib cage and feel the rib cage lift into their hands. She's like, now pretend like you're trying to calm a cat down, like just pet your ribs down. And it sounds hilarious, and it's super weird out of context.
Right.
But especially those words like calm your rib cage down, kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
When you're in the moment.
Yeah.
Right now, just talking to you, it sounds ridiculous.
Sounds ridiculous, most definitely.
Sounds ridiculous. But I am a big fan of combining the practitioner touching their own bodies and getting their own tactile feedback along with the cues. Because I think that's one of the ways that instead of trying to process something that's outside of us,
Right.
we can process that internally, which yoga is an internal practice.
It is.
So how does this feel in my body, or what does that mean? What's interesting is in the physical therapy world, patients have no issues telling you, that didn't make any sense. This is what I feel when I do it. And I love that.
That's great.
I love that because
Real-time
I have
feedback.
taken so much of that and applied. I try to use my own feedback, what it feels like in my body, to say it'll feel like you're trying to, squish your lungs a little bit or something strange.
Yeah.
But I use a lot of that now when I hear people say that.
That's great. That's you make a really good point with the physically, like, being in touch with your body. I remember the one of the first times that I went into half moon pose, and I had the cue. The teacher gave me the cue to put my extended hand, my top arm, on my top hip, right? And the reasoning they put there was to roll the hip open, right? So you can that energetic movement of rolling the hip open. But what it did for me was I finally felt my obliques, and I grew up, I was a heavy child, right? And so muscle engagement was something very strange for me because like feeling muscle definition and stuff like that, I just didn't really have it. So to have that feeling in my yoga class, to put my right hand on my right hip and feel how strong my obliques and my lower back were, and to feel that muscle, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this now. And it gave me some confidence to know that, like, I can hold my muscle and I can feel it. It's not just something that I'm like, hopefully it's engaged back there, I think it's doing it right, but no, I physically feel it. And it made a big difference in my practice.
I think that is, to me, when I teach, one of the most important pillars that I sit on is I think in our society, and in my opinion, it may have gotten worse with social media, and that may be a light statement, but we don't feel as empowered in our own bodies and know our own even just physical strength, that it's so much comparative thought, whether we are conscious of it or not. So being able to feel your muscles engage, to feel that you are strong, is so much more important than what any pose may look like. It's absolutely imperative that we realize that we don't look like anybody else,
Right.
but we are absolutely strong, no matter what social media or our own brains are starting to wrap around and tell us.
Yeah.
That you're strong, you're powerful. You need to be in your body. Because what you uniquely bring is the most important thing that we need from you.
That's beautiful. I in my other jobs in the world are Reiki practitioner and sound healer, and that's a message that I give constantly to my clients, is that it's like, one, you're your own healer. Like, I'm not doing anything magical to you. Like, I'm just holding space and giving you some tools and modalities to work with. But outside of that, like, feeling yourself, feeling the strength that you have, feeling that confidence, go out there and, like, feel that, like, put yourself to the test, get inside your body, Doesn't have to be yoga, but I'm a yogi. I'm going to recommend yogi type shit, right? You ask a monk what to do, they're going to tell you to do monk type stuff, right? But find a way to get into your body. Run, swim, go for a hike. Do something that's going to challenge yourself to know that, like, I still have energy. I am a human. I have muscles. I have, like, desires. I have this thing, right? But that's, so much anxiety and so much depression is we're disembodied. We need to embody ourselves. We need to get back into our bodies, humanize ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah, most definitely. You brought up and we only got a couple more of these we're going to go through.
Okay.
But you went over an arms above the head variation when we were talking about knitting the ribs. And so let's take Utkatasana chair pose, right? Arms are above the head, but then we say, pull your shoulders out of your ears. Right? So a lot of times when we lift our arms above the head, the shoulders immediately go to the earlobes because we're trying to reach the ceiling. Right? But kind of to your point earlier, knitting the ribs, when we lift our arms, the ribs start to flare. When we pull the ribs back in, is that what kind of signals the shoulders to drop away from the earlobes?
Nope, not at all.
Okay. All right.
So as you reach up towards the ceiling, your shoulders may come up towards your earlobes. Then I guess my question is that a bad thing?
Okay. Right on. I think that's one of those generic cues that we hear a lot, that, like pull your shoulders back down, relax your shoulders, but engage at the same time. Yeah.
I think it's, for me, this is a funny one.
Okay.
Because we know what it would look like if the shoulder blade was working properly. Like there was just no dyskinesia. There was no disconnect in the shoulder blade movement.
Okay.
Where the space right next to the neck would drop down. The shoulder blade slides forward and you reach up through your pinky fingers.
Okay.
So shoulder blades are designed to rotate. The inner border, the inside of your shoulder blade drops down. The outside of your shoulder blade scoops forward and slightly up. Okay. So we would know that right at the base of the neck gets to relax a little bit, but the upper traps are actually an upward rotator.
Okay.
So the space right at the base of your neck does have to work, but it should slide down just a little bit as opposed to hunch up towards our ears.
Right. Okay.
When we reach our arms up overhead, the cue that's simplified is drop your shoulders down. But I truly think most people mean just that little spot. Like if I were to put one finger on either side of your neck, that spot.
Right. Yes.
That spot drops down.
Okay.
Because now you've lifted your arms up. You have the rotator cuff muscle that's right on the top, the supraspinatus. And it is in a precarious position because it runs underneath one of your bones that's in your shoulder, your acromion. That's part of your shoulder blade. And then it attaches at the very top of your shoulder. It's a rotator cuff muscle. When you reach up overhead and then you pull your shoulders down, you actually tell your scapula, those bones, to drop down into your muscle.
Okay.
It's not the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Right? So another way to think about it is if you take something pliable and you put it, let's say you have a garden hose, okay? You take your garden hose, you're going to store it for winter, so you decide to put it inside of a metal container. Okay? So now you've got this metal container with a garden hose, and you're like, I need to pull the shoulders down. I need to squish the metal container because I want my hose is too puffy.
Okay. Yep.
Then you know for a fact that garden hose has seen better days.
Yep.
Right? Yep. It's going to get a wear, a little tear. And then what happens if you just keep it in that metal container and then you constantly use that hose? You're pulling it in and out of that metal container. So it's going to start to fray. It's going to start to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Do all shoulders fray and get uncomfortable? No.
Yeah.
So I think it's, a side note, highly unethical for anyone to make you afraid of your own body.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So
thank you for that.
don't be afraid of your own body, but Do not pull the entire shoulder down. Think, I want to wrap my outer armpits up and draw down at the base of your neck.
Okay.
Could we just say, draw down at the base of your neck? Sure. But that's not what's been handed down or passed around necessarily.
Right.
So maybe we'll start it now.
I was about to say, yeah, we'll probably just have an episode a year from now and be like, what is draw the area around down around your neck?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly? And sometimes if it looks like it's something like the holidays are a stressful time of the year, so more people are going to be hunched up anyhow. Because we wear our stress up around our earlobes.
Yeah.
So I might say, imagine I put my fingers on either side of your neck and I poke that zone down. That's what I'd like you to try.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right on. I appreciate that.
And it's so funny because when people are in down dog, nobody says draw your shoulders towards your hips. And your arms are overhead.
That's true.
In the exact same shape of Utkatasana.
Ah, there you go. Bringing it together. Love that. Let's see. The last one I want to talk about is the 3 points of the foot. And we talk about, there's the points of the foot and also the points of the hands, because in inversion practices, we talk about the 4 corners of the hands and the foot. We talk about the 3 points of the foot. Actually, I do hear some teachers talk about the 4 corners of the foot also. So what's your take on that, kind of that cueing? What are we trying to accomplish with that? We'll go with the foot.
I would say with the foot, I believe when teachers are talking about the feet, they are encouraging practitioners to either roll a side of the foot down or to not shift all their weight into their toes or into their heels. Okay. But I'm fairly certain that most people who practice yoga have no concept how many points they have on their feet.
Right, okay.
I'm just going to go with that.
There you go.
Anatomically speaking, there are 3.
Okay.
Your heel, which is usually absorbing when you're just standing about 2/3 of your weight.
Okay.
And then the big toe mound and the pinky toe mound. And it creates this nice triangle. Triangles are the strongest shape in nature.
Right.
And then we add the dome and the lift of the arches and all of the muscles that support the arch. So now we have a springy, strong foot.
Okay.
The 4 corners of the feet, I believe, this is my belief, I have no scientific proof.
Right.
I believe that started because it was challenging, for example, in a Warrior 2. Oftentimes, the outside of the foot starts to peel up off of the floor.
Okay.
And so how do you get people to put their weight back in the pinky toe or the knife edge, right? We have all these weird sayings.
Right, yeah.
Knife edge, I think, comes from martial arts even, right?
Totally, yep.
The knife edge of the foot. And so it might be easier to say, press down through the outer corner of your foot, because people can think in terms of squares and rectangles.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I'm big on the fact that people need to know, people as in yoga teachers, need to know that there are just 3 points. And that, weight should be distributed differently in different shapes. And I would always encourage people to try that out. I spend a weird amount of time, actually, on my own yoga mat thinking about, well, if I'm just standing here, what's it feel like with the weight in the balls of my feet? Or what if I'm flat-footed? What if I squish my feet down? Or what if I just stand in my heels? To get an idea of maybe what I might say in a class if I see things happening, or if I've seen it happen in a class, what does that feel like for me? How would I correct it?
Yeah.
But the 4 corners of the feet, as long as you know there aren't 4 corners. Because you have to be able to relay information to students in a way that they understand.
Yeah.
And they're not looking at the anatomy chart on their way into class, Right? They're like, I can't wait till she talks about external rotation of the femurs today.
Oh yeah, protraction. Here we come.
And then when she talks about the range of motion in my talus and my ankles, I get so excited.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works. Or my subtalus as I roll the outer edge of my foot down. It's just, we have to have ways that we speak to it. But I guess what I never can understand to this day is when I'm told to ground down through all four corners of my feet. Well, it took me a long time to understand that ground down didn't mean like I was grinding through the mat.
Like I'm squeezing my toes as much as I can.
When I first started, right, I didn't understand that just meant feel the ground beneath your feet.
Right. Yep. Uh-huh.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I still remember hearing a lot of these things and thinking, why am I grinding my feet into a mat?
Uh-huh.
Is that why we get a soft mat?
Right, exactly. I know, and it's so counterintuitive because I teach a lot of inversion classes, and the dialogue we've been taught, for a lot of us is don't squeeze your toes. Take the weight out of the toes, put in ball of the foot. The three corners of the feet, like we talked about. But when we get into inversions, there's a lot of activity that happens in the hands that people don't really think about because we're so told not to squeeze our toes. And when we put our hands on the mat, we got to release the hands and just push in the balls of the hand, the corner of the palms. It's like, well, that doesn't work at all because when you get upside down, your body's not meant to be upside down. So you need all the support you can get. Squeeze those fingers. Pretend that mat's trying to run away from you and snatch it. Bring it back to you. And get that thing over here. So it's a lot of the reprogramming of the counter dialogue, if you will, from standing with the feet light to hands on the mat. Your hands are freaking engaged. Like you're squeezing some stuff.
Yeah, you want that same dome.
Yeah.
Domes are strong. There's a reason that nobody sleeps in a tent with a flat roof.
Exactly.
You want a nice, strong dome for support and some spring, especially when you're working with these smaller bones in your wrists.
Right, because when you were talking about rolling to a certain side of your foot, that's even more precarious when you get to the hands. Yeah. And a lot of us have a tendency in inversions to roll to the outside corner of your hand where that little group of bones is on the opposite side of your thumb, and it's not that strong, right? It doesn't take a lot for that little group of bones to get injured in some kind of way, So really like pushing through your thumbs. That's one of the big things that I talk about when I'm doing inversions is push through your thumb, squeeze your mat. Like think about this area between the first finger and the thumb as the arch of your foot. Figure that out.
Nice.
The last thing I want to talk to you about, I just want to share a story with you. I was in Mexico a couple weeks ago, and we were in this beautiful fishing village called Yalapa. Love it. It's our second or third time there. It's like 1,200 people, no cars, just a really, really peaceful little quiet town. And there's this restaurant there called Los Abuelos, and they have the best food, most authentic food. And there's she's probably in her 90s, a Hispanic grandmother, like your stereotypical grandmother, sitting back there pressing tortillas. And she was there like 4 or 5 years ago when we were first there, sitting back there just pressing blue tortillas, handing them off to the cooks and pressing tortillas. It's just so meditative to watch her do this. And so when we went back this last time, she was there again. And I'm sitting there looking at her. I just feel so like warm and fuzzy inside. This beautiful grandmother still here pressing tortillas. And then we're in our conversation, and I saw her leave her station and start to walk. And she walked by our table, and I was mortified by the way this woman was walking. So she was walking, she had a cane, and again, she's in her 90s, right? She's been standing behind this tortilla press for I can't tell how many years. And as I saw her walking, she was walking, her right foot was all the way to the left in the front, and her left foot was all the way behind in the back. So she was walking with the most extreme X'd feet I could possibly imagine. Having her cane, putting full barren weight onto her cane as she was walking forward. And I was looking at Monica and one of the other guys we were with, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on right now. Like, I've never seen this happen. I've seen some like crazy hip dysplasia and some body dysmorphia, but like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, I'm literally about to start Googling this shit and like, what is going on? I thought of you. I'm like, I can't. Like, it's too late to call Suzanne. I'm in a foreign country, but like, I wonder what she would say about this, So while I'm pondering all this shit, trying to figure out how to help this poor lady, she comes back from wherever she was the bathroom, walking totally normal. That was her pee walk. And I'm like, oh my God. I have not felt so much relief and humor
Neither had she.
Oh my God, exactly. Oh my God, I was dying laughing. I'm like, that was the best pee walk I've ever seen in my life. Oh, thank you for making me smile. I was so displaced. I was so anguished with what's going on with this lady. She just had to pee.
That's hilarious. Really bad. Something to think about when you're teaching class towards the end.
I know, right? Oh my God, so funny. But I really enjoyed this conversation. There's so much stuff that we say as teachers that sometimes we haven't had the chance ourselves to unpack.
Right.
I've been teaching for about 6 years now, which is long for some, short for others. But no matter how long you've been teaching, there's always information to gather. Right? Whether you've done a 200 hour, a 500 hour, there's yoga degrees now that you can get, but there's still information out there. And that information is gotten from people that have done the practice, that have taught the classes, that have had the injuries, that have got recovered, learned the knowledge, and so I very deeply appreciate you coming on and sharing that knowledge with me. And not just here, just in general. Like, I know that I text you questions sometimes and you're right there on the answer for me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. It's not my knowledge to keep to myself.
And I love that. Knowledge isn't proprietary. No. It's everybody's knowledge.
Yeah.
It's universal knowledge. Just got to find the right people to ask sometimes.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck in the finishing of your school.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely have you on again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Thanks for spending time with Suzanne and I. Hope you get something out of the conversation. It was a lot of fun talking about anatomy and the fun, weird yoga cues that we like to use. If you need more information, check out the show notes for links, for information about how to get in touch with Suzanne and or myself. And please subscribe to the podcast if you like what we're doing. Subscribe to the show, like the show, leave comments. It's the best way for us to figure out how to keep the show going. Thank you so much. Obeisance and love to you all. See you next time.